At the end of 2022, Miraz has announced Bluewaters Bay. The project was unveiled in November and the sales has officially started in December. Both towers one by one. The response from the market was incredible. Both towers were officially sold out within a few hours, and on average there were 3.5 buyers competing for every unit in the project. Of course, this didn't happen by accident. By that point, Dubai's real estate market was recovering for almost 2 years, and investors had seen what has happened to Bluewaters Residences. Bluewaters Residences was launched back in 2017, and by the time Bluewaters Bay was announced, the median price per square foot in Bluewaters Residences has increased by 69% on average compared to its launch price. And for some of the most desirable apartments, the capital appreciation had already exceeded 100%. Naturally, a lot of brokers started to say the same thing. Bluewaters Bay is going to repeat the success of Bluewaters Residences. But is that really true? Can we actually compare these two projects? Will Bluewaters Bay eventually reach the same price per square foot as its older brother? Or are there important differences between two projects which most of the people overlook? That is exactly what we are going to analyze in this video. So this video will be very helpful for owners of Bluewaters Bay, investors who are considering this project to have in their portfolio, or a potential investor of Dubai real estate who is trying to analyze this market, who is trying to understand this market. I'm pretty sure that you will find lots of useful information in this video. Let's go. Even though both projects are located practically next to each other, there is one important difference between them. First of all, they were launched around 5.5 years apart from each other, and by the time Bluewaters Bay will realistically be completed, the handover gap between them will be around 9 years, which is a lot. And here I want to make a small remark. You need to understand that the property value and the growth of the price per square foot is heavily influenced by the market cycle. However, the cycle is affected by many factors and it's almost impossible to predict. That is why in this video I will focus purely on comparing these two projects. I prefer to rely purely on facts. If you understand the real value of the project, regardless of the current market cycle, it becomes much easier for you to make a decision whether you are a potential buyer or you are an owner. Should you hold the asset? Should you sell it? Should you buy it? And does this project deserve your attention at all? Now let's move on to comparison. First difference that immediately stands out is the number of floors. Bluewaters Residences is a low-rise development. Most of the buildings here are around 10 floors only. On the other hand, Bluewaters Bay consists with 2 high-rise towers. Generally speaking, in real estate, low-rise developments are always considered to be more prestigious. The logic is quite simple. The fewer number of units are on a single plot of land, the higher the value of each particular apartment. Personally, I agree with this logic and I'm a big fan of low-rise developments. But in defense of Bluewaters Bay, I have to say the following. For many people, the question of building height is still a subjective thing. I know a large number of buyers who would actually prefer a modern high-rise tower to a low-rise residential complex. Secondly, Bluewaters Bay is not just a pair of high-rise towers, with the possible exception of Emaar Beachfront, which is very dense in my opinion, and Bulgari Lighthouse, which is one of the most prestigious and expensive per square foot residential projects in the whole city. You will hardly find any skyscraper which is located that far into the sea. In fact, it's surrounded by the sea. Bluewaters Bay is located directly on the bridge between the mainland and Bluewaters Island. Because of this, especially on the higher floors, it feels as though the building is standing right in the middle of the sea. And once again, don't forget that the Bluewaters Bay will be 9 years younger than the Bluewaters Residences. And there is one more important factor that I didn't mention yet: the infrastructure. Even though the Bluewaters Bay is the new development, its residents will benefit from entire infrastructure which is already existing on Bluewaters Island. And Bluewaters Island's infrastructure is one of the biggest strengths of the whole development. So, in my opinion, these factors largely level the playing field between these two projects. Now, I'd like to come back to the arguments which many brokers actually mentioned when the Bluewaters Bay was announced. A lot of people claim that the project will experience the same capital appreciation as Bluewaters Residences did once. To be honest, I can neither deny or confirm this statement, and you probably know the reason already. Bluewaters Residences wasn't just a fantastic project on its own. It also happened to coincide with the strong market cycle growth in Dubai real estate. Will the history repeat itself with the Bluewaters Bay? The truth is, nobody knows. However, basing on everything we have discussed so far, that I personally have very little doubt about. I personally believe that over time, Bluewaters Bay will reach the same price per square foot as Bluewaters Residences. At least I'm very confident about 2 and 3 bedroom layouts which are facing the open sea. You can see them on your screen now. Now, let's move on to my favorite part, the numbers. To make everything easier to understand, I've put together this table, so let's take a look. It compares both projects across 4 key points in time, shows how each one performed during every period, and most importantly, the price gap between them. So let's go from left to right. I will start with the launch of Bluewaters Residences. The median launch price was approximately 2,280 dirham per square foot. Please wipe away your tears after seeing that number, but keep in mind that was almost 9 years ago. So opportunities like that will appear again, maybe not in this project, and maybe not exactly like this, but market always create new opportunities. Don't forget that. At this point, Bluewaters Bay didn't even exist. So let's get to the second point. It's the fourth quarter of 2022. By then, Bluewaters Residences had already appreciated by roughly 69%. It's the median appreciation. For the very best apartments, appreciation had already exceeded 100%. Bluewaters Bay entered the market at a median launch price of 3,500 dirham per square foot. That means it was launched at only about 10% discount to an already completed Bluewaters Residences. At first glance, that may seem surprisingly small, but in reality, it's fairly common. Developers often launch a new project at a price close to comparable completed projects in the same location. So this is a relatively small discount, wasn't unusual at all. Point number 3, quarter 4 2025. 3 years later, the picture looks completely different. Bluewaters Residences appreciates by another 55%. Bluewaters Bay, on the other hand, is up only about 1% from the launch. The reason is quite straightforward. By this point, Bluewaters Residences had become a completed income-producing asset with virtually no direct competitors in Dubai. Bluewaters Bay, however, was still under construction. In fact, official construction progress stood at only around 16% by quarter 4 2025. That significantly limited the price growth. As a result, the price gap between the project was widened dramatically. By quarter 4 2025, Bluewaters Residences was trading at roughly 69% premium to Bluewaters Bay. I also consider quarter 4 to be the last relatively clean reference point before geopolitics began having a meaningful impact on the market. That is basically the reason why I included that quarter in our timeline. So point number 4, from March to July. This is where things become really interesting. Following the geopolitical events earlier this year, on February 28th, Bluewaters Residences saw its median price decline by roughly 17%, which is very high number. It's important to interpret that correctly though. It doesn't mean every apartment suddenly became 17% cheaper. It simply means that during a period of uncertainty, more motivated sellers influenced the median transaction price. Now here's the surprising part. During exactly the same period, Bluewaters Bay appreciated by roughly 10%. Why? Because two forces were acting in opposite directions basically. Geopolitical uncertainty pushed the prices down and construction progress pushed the prices up. And in Bluewaters Bay case, construction progress clearly outweighed the geopolitical pressure. Construction advanced from roughly 28% in April to about 35% by the time of recording this video. The project became much more tangible, perceived risk declined, and buyers were willing to pay more. So for me, the most interesting number in this table is the gap. In the first quarter of 2025, Bluewaters Residences traded at roughly 69% premium over Bluewaters Bay. Just a few months later, that premium had narrowed to around 28%. Looking at the chart, it's easy to conclude that Bluewaters Bay will simply continue catching up at the same pace. Personally, I think it's very unlikely, and here's why. Once the geopolitical situation normalizes, I expect Bluewaters Residences to recover. Nothing fundamental about the project has changed. At the same time, I expect Bluewaters Bay to continue appreciating as construction progresses. The faster the towers rise, the more tangible the project becomes, the lower the perceived risk, and the closer it gets to handover. So my base case is that both projects continue appreciating, but for different reasons. Bluewaters residences should recover from temporary geopolitical pressure. Bluewaters Bay should continue benefiting from the construction progress. Because of that, I don't expect the gap to keep narrowing at the pace we've seen over the last 6 months. Most likely, it will widen again before gradually narrowing as Bluewaters Bay approaches the completion. After everything that we have discussed, let's answer the most practical question. Should you buy, hold, or sell Bluewaters Bay today? The SPA states that the completion date is the second quarter of 2027. But taking into consideration the current progress, I would definitely tell you that you should understand that the grace period of 12 months will be fully used by Miraz in this case, because high-rise buildings are taking time to complete. That means that the prices will reach its peak in around 24 months since that moment, since July 2026. So before selling, I would ask myself a simple question. Am I happy selling my unit today, knowing that strongest pricing is still 2 years away? If you own one of the stronger units, 2 or 3 bedroom apartments with an open sea views, I would definitely consider holding it if you don't need an urgent liquidity. As you already saw from the table, Bluewaters Bay, along with the construction progress, will gain its capital. Holding is not the right decision for everyone. If you believe you can make a higher return by redeploying your capital elsewhere, selling may be a better choice. So also one of the right questions that you need to ask yourself, can this capital generate more income somewhere else? For buyers, I would use Bluewaters Residences median price per square foot as the benchmark for the units with the good views in Bluewaters Bay. Me personally, I feel confident offering for investment as of now only 2 and 3 bedroom apartments in Bluewaters Bay, since they have an unmatched views and panoramic glazed windows. And that is something that a lot of units in Bluewaters Residences doesn't have. If you're considering buying or selling your property in Bluewaters Bay or Bluewaters Residences, I'd be happy to help. If you found something useful in this video, I would also appreciate like and subscribe. See you in the next video.